So, picture this. You're the king of this incredibly wealthy port city, right? And you are staring at a piece of clay that you know, deep down, is going to be your absolute last cry for help. It's the early 12th century BC, and you're Ammurapi, the final ruler of Ugarit, which was this glittering, massive metropolis on the coast of what's now northern Syria. The weight of your entire crumbling world is resting right on your shoulders, and you're dictating a frantic, desperate message to your only remaining ally.
The message he dictated on that clay, it captures this level of visceral panic that literally reaches right across 3,000 years. He's writing to the ruler of Al-Ashia, that's modern-day Cyprus, addressing him incredibly respectfully as my father. He says, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." But here is the truly haunting detail about this specific piece of clay. When archaeologists dug it up in 1928, they found it still sitting inside a kiln. It had been hastily scribbled and shoved in the oven to bake so it could survive the journey across the Mediterranean, but it was never sent. They found it surrounded by an absolute sea of bronze arrowheads and a thick layer of ash. The end came before the clay could even dry.
To really grasp what was lost here, you kind of have to look at what Ugarit actually was. We're not talking about some isolated, primitive village. This was a booming, cosmopolitan hub of about 10,000 people. I mean, they had diplomatic marriages with Egyptian royalty, a massive economy, and administration juggling multiple languages. But for all that wealth, they were incredibly vulnerable. They were a vassal state of the mighty Hittite Empire up to the north. And when things started going wrong across the Bronze Age world, the Hittites called in their debts. Ammurapi actually notes in his unsent letters that his overlords requisitioned his entire military. All his troops sent to the land of Hatti, his entire fleet of ships sent to the coast of Lucca. So this great city, despite all its walls and riches, was left completely defenseless, basically abandoned to face the dark on its own.
Now, usually when you hear about this era, the infamous Sea Peoples get all the blame for burning these cities down. But, societies rarely just fall to one single event. What really killed Ugarit, and honestly the rest of the Bronze Age, was this incredibly messy, interconnected stack of disasters. We're looking at a complete systemic collapse. First, you have prolonged, severe droughts, drying up all the farmlands. That immediately triggers widespread famine and food shortages. Then you mix in what geologists call earthquake storms, just rippling across the Mediterranean fault lines. Add the severing of international trade routes, meaning no more bronze, and finally you get the mass migrations, the rebellions, and those mysterious maritime raiders. The raiders were really just the match. The Mediterranean was already covered in gasoline.
And to give you an idea of just how bad the environmental disaster was before the invaders even showed up, there's this other letter in the archives. This one was sent to Pharaoh Seti II down in Egypt. Ammurapi is practically begging here. He writes, "In the land of Ugarit there's a severe hunger. May the king give grain to save my life and to save the citizens." The absolute desperation is just palpable. Ugarit is begging Egypt for emergency grain shipments just to stave off mass starvation. But the tragic irony? At the exact same time, their Hittite overlords were forcing Ugarit to use whatever maritime infrastructure they had left to ship grain to Anatolia. So they were starving and being bled completely dry by their allies at the very same time. The most terrifying part of all this, it's how incredibly fast the whole thing just unravels. For centuries, this region was this thriving, interconnected network of empires, and then the bottom falls out. Around 1225 BC, those seismic events really start rocking the Mediterranean. Fast forward to 1192 BC, and we actually know that exact date because astronomers tracked a total solar eclipse recorded on a tablet. Ugarit is in its absolute final days. By 1190 BC, it is violently destroyed and completely abandoned. Just a few years later, in 1177 BC, the massive Egyptian empire barely survives the cataclysmic battle with the Sea Peoples, and they are so weakened they never truly recover their former glory. This entire complex civilization unravels in less than 50 years. I want to pause on this idea of an earthquake storm, because it's a terrifying scientific reality that perfectly set the stage for this collapse. An earthquake storm isn't just one big tremor, right? It's a prolonged sequence of severe seismic events where tectonic plates literally unzip along a fault line over a period of 50 to 60 years. When the archaeologist Claude Schaefer actually excavated Ugarit, he found walls that were geometrically undulating. They were buckled in ways they were never built to do. So long before any hostile ships appeared on the horizon, the very ground beneath Ugarit was continuously shivering, completely undermining the city's infrastructure and the resilience of its people.
The archaeologist Eric Klein has this brilliant analogy for this that I just have to share. He says, it's like a fine race car, where if you throw a rod from your engine, suddenly you're driving a piece of junk. And that is exactly what a highly advanced, globalized society is. It's incredibly fragile. The Bronze Age relied so heavily on continuous, international trade of vital resources. I mean, they needed tin from Afghanistan and copper from Cyprus just to make bronze. As soon as those trade routes were cut by drought or earthquakes or pirates, the engine threw a rod. Suddenly, the greatest empires in the world couldn't even maintain their own tools or weapons.
What's really fascinating here is the sheer scale of the final invasion, or, well, actually, the lack of it. When you hear about the Sea Peoples wiping out civilizations, you probably picture a massive armada, right? Like an ancient D-Day. But look at the actual numbers recorded in the diplomatic letters. Ammurapi notes the initial attack on Ugarit carried out by just 7 enemy ships. 7! Later on, an official from Wallachia writes to warn him that another 20 enemy ships had been spotted leaving a mountainous area. These are incredibly small numbers. It proves the Sea Peoples weren't some massive, unified, invading empire. They were highly mobile, opportunistic maritime raiders picking the bones of a dying system. But when your troops are gone and your walls are cracked, 7 ships is all it takes.
Which brings us to the actual final hours of the city, and it plays out almost like a movie. First, the enemy establishes a beachhead at Rasu, which is a neighboring port just 5 miles away. Ammurapi sends one last desperate plea to the Hittite viceroy at Carchemish, begging for chariots, but none come. The vanguard advances directly on Ugarit. What follows isn't some long, drawn-out siege. It's fierce, street-level, hand-to-hand combat. Archaeologists digging through the ruins found deep, thick layers of ash and charcoal from fires that burned simultaneously all over the city. They found abandoned wealth, buried hoards that the owners clearly never came back for, and bronze arrowheads still embedded in the masonry today. The city was sacked, completely burned, and then just silence.
But this leads to the most chilling question of the whole story. Why wasn't Ugarit ever rebuilt? Almost every other major city in the ancient Near East, places like Damascus, Beirut, Sidon, they were repeatedly sacked over the centuries, but people always came back. They rebuilt. Ugarit was different. A city that had been the commercial heartbeat of the Levant for thousands of years was permanently abandoned. And weirdly, there are no mass graves. There are no records of the population being enslaved in mass. They just vanished. It's this eerie permanence that makes the fall of Ugarit so deeply fascinating. I'd actually like to know what you think happened to the survivors, if there even were any. Drop your take in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to read them. And hey, if exploring this kind of history is interesting to you, hitting the like button really helps more people find the channel. Consider subscribing too, so we can stick around for the next real mystery at the edge of science and history. Catch you next time.